Good afternoon, everyone. Please silence your phones for the duration of the meeting. Welcome to the November 26, 2024 meeting of the THS Board of Directors. I'm Michael English. I'm the President and Chair of the Board of THS. This meeting is hybrid format. There are members physically present, two of us. We do have others online, but but we don't have a quorum. I think everybody should know from the outset. We'll treat this as a workshop today. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
of the United States of America, which is one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What was that?
Feedback.
Hello to all you people online. Item number 2 on the agenda is public input. Is anyone present who would like to be heard? Seeing none, we will move to approval of minutes. We cannot do that at this point, so we will save those for next month. Next, we have a presentation of the fiscal year 2025 THS budget discussion follow-up. The presentation is uploaded to your services and also included in the packet starting page 9. Scott Drainville, Chief Executive Officer, you are recognized to introduce the item.
Thank you, President English. On August 27th, the THS Board approved the fiscal year 2025 budget with a shortfall. Mr. Justin Willis, Hodge Director of Planning and Scheduling, will review the streetcar cost per revenue hour as compared to other properties and the streetcar administrative costs. Mr. Donnie Murray, Manager of Community and Business Engagement, will provide an overview of the public outreach. Mr. Willis.
Good afternoon, board members, President English and CEO Drainville. Justin Willits, Director of Planning and Scheduling. And
Can you speak up, please, into the microphone?
Yeah, is that better?
Better.
All right, cool. I'll take just through the first half of the presentation, and then we can take questions as needed. If you want to interrupt, that's fine as well. There's a nice, intimate group here today. The agenda we'll run through is a review of the FY 2025 THS budget as adopted on August 27th, the cost allocation model done internally and done by the third-party consultant, the streetcar cost per revenue hour and administrative costs compared to our peers, the reinstatement of the fares and to replace the FDOT subsidy, and open discussion to identify potential solutions. So this was the budgeted approved amount of $1.475 million with administrative costs and the $700,000 to replace the FDOT grant. A recent phone call on October 23rd, Mike Perry at the city said the city had budgeted for the $700,000, so it's really the administrative costs that are of top of mind today. Now, I'm not exactly sure where that is in the city budget. I was not able to find it, but that was verbally confirmed by city staff. So you can see that 1.475 administrative costs was generated by staff, and then when we had that reviewed by a third-party consultant, it was reduced $90,000 to the total of $1.384 million, which we reviewed with city staff as well within the last month. What we wanted to kind of talk about a little bit today is just to make everybody more aware of kind of where we've been and where we are now as at the approved budgeted amount. What you see in the table and the graphic on the bottom of your screen is the fiscal year 2022 cost per revenue hour for the streetcar service compared to other peer streetcar systems around the nation. This is the National Transit Database data that normalizes costs for transit agencies by mode across different sizes of systems that are operated differently. And it kind of is a benchmark for comparing yourself to peers. So as you can see here in fiscal year 2022, our cost for the streetcar service was $123, far below the average of our peers. This was actually celebrated in an article that was shared both at this board and across social media about Hart being one of the lower cost per revenue hours across the nation. And while that was a great thing, it did kind of highlight that the true cost of the system needed to probably be better represented. And my device just ran into a problem and shut down. Sorry about that. It just froze. I didn't even touch it. I know. I don't know what happened. So we'll just pause for 1 second here, and Danielle can share from her screen. So that fiscal year 2022 number of 123, I've been staring at these numbers enough over the past year that I can speak to them without looking at the slides. But as that comes back up, what we've done is we've updated. The next slide you're going to see is what we have budgeted at for the fiscal year approved 25 budget, which brings us back on par with our peers. It's not higher than the highest from 22, but it's right in the sweet spot, right in the middle of that range. Are you all seeing this on your screens? Yeah. Yes, okay.
We're seeing streetcar cost per revenue hour.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is the slide we left off on. So yes, this is the fiscal year 2022 cost per revenue hour for all of these agencies, with Hart on the left at 123. And on the next slide, you can see Hart's totals are at the lower end of these trends from 17 to 22. And the dashed red line is the $233 that was approved in the streetcar budget. And then on this next slide, you can see that total, the total administrative costs billed in FY22 were 6.5%. And when you update the administrative costs into the budget, as we did for the approved FY25, that percentage of administrative costs in the THS budget is at 23.6%, well within the range of the peers from FY22. And the reason we use FY22 is that was the most recently available data at the time this was created, more or less. So when we get fresh 23 data in, we'll kind of compare that as well, but we fully expect it to be still consistent and in a range of that's reasonable and fair. I kind of feel like I jumbled that up quite a bit, so please feel free to ask any questions if you need any clarifications. So a couple of the options here to address the shortfall is obviously the City of Tampa provides full funding to cover the budgeted shortfall. And then the second option, which we have gone through all the procedural and appropriate steps for federal processes, et cetera, is to re-implement a fare and reduce service that would partially cover the budget shortfall. So we've done a fare equity analysis and public input, which Donnie will speak to in a moment. And then there would still be a shortfall, even in all of the fare scenarios that we've generated, which I will touch on after Donnie presents his information. And so I'll wait until then to kind of go a little bit further into detail about that. And then I will hand it off to Donnie to take over for a few minutes.
Hi, for the record, my name is Donnie Murray. I'm the manager of community and business engagement. I'm going to give a bit of a background on and a historical refresher on how we've gotten here to this budget shortfall, and then go over the public input process that we did. So again, a little bit of a background. So the streetcar has been free since October 2018, when we got an initial 3-year grant from FDOT that removed the previous $2.50 one-way fare and then $4 all-day fare, and it also allowed us to increase frequency and expand service hours. We were able to continue these free rides and service improvements year by year from additional short-term funding from a combination of FDOT, City of Tampa, and Downtown Partnership. However, all those funding sources have now expired as of the end of fiscal year 2024. Also around the same time, a Florida law directed FDOT to conduct a review of Hart's organizational structure and operations. And so one of the recommendations that came out of that analysis was for us to do a cost allocation to confirm that operations costs were being tracked properly. And it did show that Hart was drastically underestimating the cost of operations. So our previous cost that we were saying was around $180,000, whereas realistically our new budgeted administrative cost is around $1.384 million. So a very large difference. So again, in August, the THS board approved this budget that addressed that discrepancy, along with had that gap in funding for maintaining free rides and the same level of service, which gets us to that budget shortfall. One of the potential options to address that shortfall is to add a fare back to the streetcar. And so as required by federal law and our HART policy, we proactively did soliciting public input and a fare equity analysis about that proposal. So our public input process about the proposed re-implementation of a fare to the streetcar began on Wednesday, October 30th, when we sent out a press release and then created a unique web page that went live that day. Our main source for receiving feedback from the public was a survey online that we created through our customer service platform called SeeClickFix. But we also accepted feedback through phone calls, emails, and mail to ensure that those with limited access could still participate. We also had HART staff at various streetcar stations starting from November 1st all the way through November 7th to be able to answer questions and receive feedback, which led up to our in-person public hearing on Thursday, November 7th. We also promoted this opportunity to provide feedback through various sources such as our HART and streetcar websites, social media, through emails. We had posters at every streetcar station. We also did newspaper advertisements, and we made sure that the survey and our flyers were provided in both English and Spanish. So we received a huge, overwhelming response in just the 1 week time that we were receiving feedback. We received over 500 comments. And overall, the community sentiment was against the decision to add a fare back to the streetcar. People primarily predicted that adding a fare back would largely reduce ridership, and they were concerned about that. For one, they thought that adding the fare back would reduce ridership because they didn't see a fare as being justified for just the short 2.7 mile distance. They were concerned about the imposition of a fare would largely take away that large number of choice riders who are contributing those really important economic dollars to the urban core and our local businesses, who could potentially choose to spend that discretionary money elsewhere instead of coming into downtown and riding the streetcar for free. They were also concerned that reduced ridership would increase a lot of traffic and congestions onto our roads. For example, the Water Street area didn't exist prior to us having free fares, and so with all that increased apartments and condos and traffic and events at Emily Arena, they were really concerned about adding traffic back onto roads. Also, a lot of our urban core residents and riders are really interested in future development, and so they're very concerned about a reduction of ridership having potential implications on the future extension project. So all those reasons were the support for keeping the fares free. In our survey, we also asked what people thought just was a reasonable fare for if we did add one back to the streetcar, and majority of the people said $1 was a reasonable one-way fare. We did also ask potentially $2, $2.50, or $3, but as you can see, not many people thought that that was a reasonable one-way fare. In our survey, we also asked where people lived or where they were coming from, which showed us that these 500 responses gave us a really good diversity of where they're coming from and who's riding the streetcar. So majority of the people that were using the streetcars giving us feedback are people that live in the urban core or work in the urban core or around the urban core, people in downtown, Channel District, Ybor. We only had a small segment of national or international tourists, and then the rest of our riders came from either the Tampa Bay area or the Tampa itself, so places like Brandon and South Tampa. So again, these 500 responses gave us a really good diversity of where people were coming from. And in our survey, we did also ask how were they using the streetcar, either that day or in general, and again, showed us a great diversity to make sure that even though this wasn't a statistically significant survey, that we wanted to make sure we had a great diversity of people, how they use the streetcar, making sure we weren't leaning towards maybe one type of group being the loudest voice. So as you can see, a wide variety of ways that people use the streetcar, whereas again, prior to free fares, it was generally assumed that ridership mainly came from just tourists or conventions or those weekend locals, whereas now you see people using it for all sorts of purposes throughout the day, every single day. So you have people choosing it to go to events, trying to have a safe night out. You have a lot of people spending money at our attractions through events at Emily Arena, eating out for lunch and dinner. We also have people using it every single day, getting to places like Publix, their gym, getting to errands and shopping. Even USF Health now is in our area. And then that last chunk is that everyday sightseeing people, tourists, coming on for fun. So again, overall, it gave us a really great diversity of responses. And now I'll hand it back over to Justin.
All right, so as I mentioned earlier, part of the work that the planning department, planning and scheduling does was to look into what kind of impact any fare may have on the streetcar ridership. So we've done a fare elasticity analysis in-house, and then again had a third-party consultant use a slightly different methodology and kind of landed at the same range that we did. So what you can see here is 4 different scenarios: A, B, C, and D. And the real summary here is that there is no fare that is going to completely cover the cost, the administrative costs as budgeted and approved. There are varying levels of fare that will impact ridership in different ways that will still leave some bit of a deficit, right? So if we'll start with scenario A. Well, the first line is no fare, same service. That's basically the projection for the year, right? The $1 fare at the same level of service would require an additional approximately $900,000 and would generate just over 1.1 million rides based on our estimates.
Wait, say that again?
So scenario A, it would be if we implemented a $1 fare at the same level of service we have today, we estimate we would generate about 1.1 million rides, but only generate under $500,000 of fare revenue. So we would still require an additional $900,000 to make up the funding gap. So if you dial that fare up a little bit higher, say you put it at $2 with the same level of service, you'd lose about 300,000 riders. So you'd have about 880,000 riders. You'd generate far more revenue at 750,000. But the funding gap would then be about $635,000. So scenario C, which if you're looking at what the delta would be as the best financial case scenario, scenario C would be with a $2.50 flat fare, just $2.50 fare. That's what it was before the fare-free service went in place. But at a reduced level of service, would generate under 500,000 riders, about 500,000 in fare revenue, but only leave a funding gap of 350,000. And then scenario D would be a $2.50 fare at the same level of service, would generate almost 800,000 riders, but the funding gap would then be about just over $500,000. So you can kind of see those are the kind of scenarios that we've been trying to come up with to address the budget shortfall. So there is still guidance from you all and the HART board on those scenarios, and what we could further develop and refine is something that we are planning and prepared to do depending on how things transpire. But I just wanted to, when you look at the service hour columns, a very high level of service is obviously needed to generate a lot of revenue. But if you want to reduce cost and reduce the revenue needed, you could reduce service quite a bit and reduce the gap at the end of the day, which is scenario C. And just to give you all a little bit of insight, before this grant and this whole fare-free frequent streetcar service was put in place, I believe it was about 13,000 annual hours. And that was a very, very much so a bare bones 20-minute headways most of the time, 15 peak. So, yeah.
What was the total ridership before it went fare free?
350, 400,000? It was under 400,000. And that was with the $2.50 fare, $5 all day fare setup. So this 16,000 hour was an exercise my team went through to try to maintain a really high level of service during the peak hours, and then a kind of a bare bones very early and a bare bones later evening to really, based on existing ridership numbers, if you were really trying to capture the highest ridership time of day. So that's how we landed on the 16,000 hour service hour level. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions?
Yeah, I was curious, can you go a little bit more into what informs the assumptions about the drop in demand based on price? I'm sure you have a methodology, I just don't know. I'd like to know a little bit more if you could explain it in concise terms that we could digest here and now.
Yeah, so what we did is we basically looked at the ridership before the service was put in place, compared that to some other systems. We actually had the consultant that did their independent cost allocation and ridership projections. We had them use some of the trolleys, like the beach trolleys in PSTA, and how they respond to fares, and that's how we came up with the everything from the average fare to the impact of ridership and best practices for elasticity, and how those really impact. So these numbers they're conservative, but they're comfortable. So we would hope, maybe say the average fare is slightly higher than this. But the nature of elasticity is usually an exercise of going from a certain dollar amount to a certain dollar amount, not from a zero to a full fare. So there's not a lot of good research out there about these kinds of impacts, which is why we did our own internal and had an external, and they basically landed in the same place.
I assume they looked at Sunrunner and how the imposition of fares there from a fare-free operation impacted that as well.
Correct.
Dave?
Question? So, in your peer-to-peer analysis of costs, is that, those are all-in costs that would include, for the other peer operations, all of the cost items that are listed in our budget for HART, as well as the shortfall in administrative costs?
So anything reported as an operational expense plus the administrative costs as budgeted, spread out over every service hour, planned for the year in the budget.
And so the peer group information is all in. It would have the administrative as well as the individual items that we have in our budget?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, and when you look at the difference between the FY '22, where we were far below our peers at 6.5%, the FY '25 approved budget was at 23.6%, which is, right in the middle of the range. And I will say that the Kansas City, the one unique thing about them is that it is a private operator, so their administrative costs are much higher, include profit, that sort of thing. So, but it's still a similarly sized system. It's fare-free. I think the peak vehicles are four to five peak vehicles, so it's very comparable, other than an independent private operator. So they have some higher costs because of.
Understood. Thanks.
Any other questions? Anyone online?
I do have one other question.
Thank you so,
Speak in the microphone, Dave.
One other question. What is the relationship between the assumptions you made with regard to fair amounts and the idea of equity? Are there limits based on federal discrimination laws in terms of how much you can actually charge individuals that may have, who would be qualified for treatment as disadvantaged?
So we would still offer discounted fares for certain groups. But we didn't really, we teased out a few higher dollar amounts. But until we get guidance from the board, we didn't want to make any kind of wild assumptions for maybe $4 or $5 per boarding. We didn't think that was really very appropriate. So we do have those numbers, but we felt like the old fare of $250 was a reasonable place to begin this conversation. But once we get to, if we get further down the line, then we can explore potentially what that looks like. But what you'll inevitably see is when we tested a $3 and $5 fare, the ridership drops out the bottom. And then the gap in funding needs at the end of the day grows bigger.
Thank you.
I think we did have a question online that I interrupted.
hey, Justin, yes, it's been, so, William, I wanted to ask, is that Justin, Mr. Lewis?
Yes, ma'am.
A question, on the aspect of the communication around this effort. I know that, we've been talking about the price of the fare and so forth, but do we need to consider how we plan on communicating this to the world and making sure our customers are understanding what's happening and why? Have you thought about that as well?
Yeah, I'm going to call Donnie back up because that's his wheelhouse.
Okay.
Again, this is Donnie
Thank
Murray,
you.
Manager, Community and Business
I just-
Engagement. So previously, when we were receiving feedback in our materials, we did explain that the funding gap came from the end of federal grants for providing free fare. So in that regard, we have communicated that that was where this is coming from. Going forward, I think that's what we're looking for the discussion now, is that once we get a decision, the whole marketing team will create a whole campaign to make sure we properly communicate the background of this while also making sure everyone understands what's happening in the future.
Okay, thank you so much for answering the question. I do have, instead of maybe approaching it from the fare standpoint, what about, have you considered what's best and how we maintain our services? I know someone's much smarter than me on that, much smarter than me on what needs to be done. I just want to make sure that, we explain the price is fine, but it's beyond the price of the service that's being provided. I don't want it to be, I'm just making a recommendation, I just don't want it to be centered around the price, is what we did. It's about, making sure we can service everyone. Does that make sense?
I think I got you, but I don't think you really posed a question, more of a statement.
I just wanted to, okay, that's okay.
Okay, you're just a little choppy. I apologize.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. You can proceed forward.
If I may.
I beg your pardon?
If I may. So I would say, we're presenting this as an option, as a last case resort, hoping that, with our conversations with the city, we're gonna find the funding some way. But we wanted to bring this is, as the operator of the streetcar, this is our federal requirements to do our outreach and meet our compliance requirements. And these are the options. If DHS and the Harbor Board
Scott.
decided at some time that a fare would need to be added, all the work's already been done. So that's my staff, under my direction, did all, their due diligence on getting all this information. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions? If not, thank you. It's a very interesting presentation, Justin. Since this is a workshop and we won't take any action anyway today, this may be prepared for this to come up next month. It would be nice to get a reaction from the city sooner than later, but I understand that you guys are still in the process of analyzing this and making some decisions. So hopefully in the next month or two, we'll get to the bottom of it. Just so you know, there's also some thought about changing the special assessment district that we have. We have a special assessment district, which is equal to 0.33 mils for everyone in the district excluding homesteaded property. And that raises about $1.3 or $4 million a year. We could include homesteaded property, not we, but the city council could choose to do that, which I don't recall the exact number, but I've seen it. I think it would raise $600,000 or $700,000 more a year. Not enough to cover the shortfall. Increasing the assessment's another option, although it's not one I'm very enthusiastic about. But we'll see. Those need to be certainly taken in consideration. I think the city is thinking about that possibility. Last time I talked to Vic. So that all being said, thank you for the presentation, and let's move on and finish our agenda today. Marketing Services Report, Mr. Wazinski. Is he present? There he is, in a flash.
Good afternoon, Chair, and the rest of the board. Frank Wazinski, Manager of Marketing Communications for Hart. And I'm going to be giving the report for November. For the month, we had Streetcar Live, collateral that we did, and other promotional material related to that, and as well as extended streetcar service collateral. We celebrated the record annual ridership again with over 1 million or 1.3 million trips taken during the year, despite having multiple days without service due to the hurricanes. So we highlighted this on our social channels, and it actually generated some local broadcast and print coverage. And some of those stories are included in the media coverage as well. As I mentioned, Streetcar Live, we had the group Down to Earth on board the streetcar in October. And during the month, we also promoted streetcar service to a number of events such as Oktoberfest Tampa, Haunted Wharf, Undead in the Water, and some concerts, lightning games, etc. In terms of the coverage, Donnie and Justin touched on it, but we launched a campaign, Fear Free, during the month to gather feedback for the effort on whether or not to start charging a fare on the streetcar or not. And you can see some coverage that we garnered during the month. And one thing to touch on during the discussion, for advertising purposes, we had $1,500 from Villain Arts Convention. They took a half side for the streetcar during the month. It looks like, I don't have specific numbers, but it looks like we're going to have an overage beyond the $115,000 that was budgeted for advertising revenue.
Oh, good.
So hopefully I'll have a clearer picture of what that looks like at the end of or at the next meeting. But it looks like we'll have, possibly $100,000 or more in advertising revenue in addition to what we originally budgeted. So there's the Vector Media is doing a really great job selling. So
That's great. Thank you. Any questions? If not, thank you, Frank.
all right.
Streetcar System Report, Mr. Allen.
Good afternoon, President English, members of the board, Mr. Drainville, Ryan Allen, Director of Streetcar Operations. October was an interesting month for us operationally. We had 597 missed trips. This number is unprecedented, but it was because 468 and a half of those trips were caused by Hurricane Milton. We were shut down for 2 days, and we shut down early on Tuesday, and we struggled to put some service out on Fridays because of the number of our employees that had to evacuate for the storm. We had 81 trips were lost due to mechanical issues, 30 and 3/4 trips due to a shortage of operators. 7.5 trips were caused by the CSX interlock being blocked by a train. 7 trips due to other weather events, and finally, 2.5 trips due to an accident that I'll tell you about in just a second. Of the trips we did run, 99.68% were on time.
That's great after a
So-
tough month.
So, and we had an incident and 1 accident in October. On the 26th, a child injured its arm when the window fell on it. EMS responded, but the parents refused transportation to a hospital. Haven't heard anything else about this incident.
The window fall out?
No, it just came down. They had it up and.
Yeah.
And then on the 31st of October, streetcar 435 was northbound along 8th Avenue when a vehicle ran the stop sign at 14th Street and was struck by the car. There were no injuries, and the private vehicle left the scene before police could respond. Ridership for October was 82,014. That's down from last year, which was 109,370. That, of course, is due to the hurricane, and ridership was slow to respond afterwards. Of the people we did haul, 79 of those were ADA boardings. And finally, on November 15th, we graduated 2 new motormen. We have 2 more in class right now. On November 12th, we hired a service attendant So currently, as it stands, we have 1 service attendant and 2 motorman positions that are open. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Hearing none, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Nice report, and thanks for everything you do. So let's move to legal and legislative reports. Mr. Smoker, do you have anything?
Nothing to report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair's report. No, I really don't. I've been somewhat consumed by what was going on with our budget, but we've discussed that, and so we'll move along. So, Mr. Drainville, do you have a report?
Yeah, just one update this month. So on November 19th, FDOT wrapped up its quarterly site visit and audit of the Hart Streetcar operations. The Safety Department and the Streetcar operations attend monthly teleconferences and quarterly site visits with FDOT to ensure that we stay up to date with the latest federal and state regulations. The FDOT site visit consists of 2.5 days of reviewing operations, training, safety, and maintenance, just to name a few. FDOT was able to assist in closing 2 of our corrective action plans, or our CAPs. They accepted Hart's continuity of operations plan, which allows us to start developing an updated plan, and also accepted our security audit, which closed the second outstanding CAP. The safety team staff presented to FDOT the required vendor contractor training. That is also, the training is required for any person working on the streetcar right away. And lastly, safety and FDOT discussed the new fatigue risk management program requirement by the FTA. And this is our first step to draft a request of information, or RFI, by December 4, 2024. And that concludes my report.
Thank you so much. Compliance reports are included in Section 10 for review by the board. Is there any old business? Is there any new business? If not, I declare this meeting adjourned, and we'll see you all next month.
Did you say new business?
I beg your pardon?
I'm sorry, did you say?
Did you
I
have
just would
something?
like to comment quick. Yes, sir. If
What
you
was
don't
it?
mind, Chairman.
No, go right ahead.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone for all the work they've done. And, I know I asked questions, and you guys are already looking at things from a marketing standpoint, looking at the safety aspect, and the reports, even more initiatives. So I just wanted to say happy Thanksgiving, and thank you for all the work you've done on this committee.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
too. Yes, thank you very much, too. Okay, any other comments? If not, this meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk.
Thank you. Take care.